Right now, on a table somewhere near you, there is probably a small shaker or a grinder full of tiny black specks. Black pepper. You reach for it without thinking, twist a little over your food, and forget it the very next second. It is the most ordinary seasoning on earth. It sits for free on restaurant tables, ignored beside the salt. But there was a time when those same little black specks were counted out one by one, like jewels. A time when pepper was worth its weight in gold, and sometimes more. When it was used to pay rents, ransoms, and dowries. When kings hoarded it, merchants grew rich on it, and the hunt to control it launched fleets, toppled old empires of trade, and dragged Europe into conquering half the world. So how did a simple dried berry become one of the most valuable substances on the planet? Why were people willing to kill and die for it? And how did the king of spices end up as a throwaway afterthought on your table? To understand, you have to follow the pepper back to where it begins. Every peppercorn starts its life on a climbing vine called Piper nigrum. Its original home is the lush, rain-soaked Malabar coast of southwestern India, in what is now the state of Kerala. The vine produces small round fruits, and botanically, each one is a drupe, a fruit with a single seed inside, like a tiny cherry. Picked and dried in the sun, those fruits wrinkle and darken into the hard black peppercorns you know. And here is something most people never realize. Black, white, and green pepper are not different plants. They are the very same fruit, simply picked at different stages and processed in different ways. For thousands of years, this single plant from one stretch of Indian coast was the center of a trade that spanned the known world. Pepper is old, astonishingly old. When archaeologists examined the mummy of the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II, who died around 1213 BCE, they found peppercorns packed into his nostrils, placed there during the elaborate process of mummification. Think about that. Pepper from India had already traveled thousands of miles to the Nile more than 3,000 years ago, valuable enough to accompany a pharaoh into eternity. But it was the Romans who became truly obsessed. Ancient Rome developed a deep hunger for pepper, importing it in enormous quantities across the Indian Ocean. Roman ships learned to ride the seasonal monsoon winds, the powerful winds that reverse direction with the seasons, sailing them straight to Indian ports like the legendary Muziris on the Malabar coast. And home again? Pepper flooded into Roman kitchens and Roman medicine. And not everyone was happy about it. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, in his great work, Natural History, grumbled about the staggering amount of Roman wealth pouring eastward to pay for luxuries like pepper. He was baffled that people paid such fortunes for a fruit whose only real quality, he sniffed, was its sharp bite. By his estimate, a vast river of Roman coin drained away to India and the East every single year, much of it for these little black grains. Pepper was, quite literally, a drain on an empire, and it stayed precious long after Rome's golden age. According to ancient accounts, when the Visigoth king Alaric besieged the city of Rome in the early 5th century, the ransom he demanded to spare it included gold, silver, and 3,000 pounds of pepper. Imagine that. A barbarian army at the gates, and part of the price of the eternal city was paid in peppercorns. For centuries afterward, in medieval Europe, pepper remained almost unimaginably valuable. It was used as money. People paid rents, taxes, and dowries in pepper. Wealthy merchants were nicknamed pepper sacks. There is even a phrase still buried in English law today, a peppercorn rent, meaning a tiny token payment, a faint echo of the days when a single peppercorn was a thing of real worth. But there was a mystery at the heart of all this wealth. Almost no one in Europe knew where pepper actually came from. The trade was controlled by a long chain of middlemen. Arab merchants carried the spices from India and the East, and the city of Venice grew fabulously rich as the gateway that funneled pepper into Europe, marking up the price at every step. The true source, that one rainy coast in India, was a closely guarded secret, and into that gap of knowledge rushed wild legends. Some Europeans genuinely believed that pepper grew in distant forests, crawling with venomous serpents. The story claimed that harvesters had to set the forest on fire to drive the snakes away, and that the flames were what scorched the peppercorns black. It was complete nonsense, of course. Pepper turns dark simply by drying in the sun. But the myth shows just how mysterious and far away the source of this everyday spice once seemed, and that mystery and the fortunes locked inside it set the stage for one of the most consequential and violent chapters in human history. Because by the late 1400s, the powers of Europe were done paying the markups of middlemen. They wanted to reach the source of pepper and spices themselves, directly, and seize the trade. This hunger became one of the driving engines of the Age of Exploration, the great era when Europeans set out across the oceans. People often say explorers sailed for gold and for God, but just as often, they sailed for spice. In 1498, a Portuguese captain named Vasco da Gama did what no European had done before. He sailed all the way around the southern tip of Africa and across the Indian Ocean, landing at Calicut on that very same Malabar coast, the home of pepper. When his men were asked what had brought them so far across the world, the famous reply was simple. They had come seeking Christians and spices. A sea route to the source had finally been opened, and it changed everything in the darkest possible way. This is the dark chapter, because what followed was not gentle trade. It was conquest. The Portuguese quickly realized that whoever controlled the spice routes controlled immense wealth and power. So they took them by force. They built fortresses, seized ports, and used their cannon-armed ships to dominate the Indian Ocean, attacking rivals and bombarding coastal cities that would not bend to them. Vasco da Gama himself, on a later voyage, committed acts of staggering brutality against civilians and pilgrims at sea to terrorize the region into submission. The age of the polite spice merchant was over. The age of the armed empire had begun, and the Portuguese were only the first. Soon the Dutch and the English arrived, and they fought one another and the local powers savagely for control of the spice trade. They formed enormous, militarized trading companies, the Dutch and English East India Companies, which behaved like states unto themselves, with their own armies and the power to wage war. The scramble for pepper and other spices helped pull European powers deep into Asia, where they would stay as conquerors and colonizers for centuries. The historian Jack Turner, who wrote a sweeping book called Spice, traced how this craving reshaped the entire world, and not kindly. A great deal of the modern map, with all its borders and wounds, was drawn in the chase for flavors like the one in your shaker. A single spice had helped launch the colonial age. So what does any of this have to do with the pepper grinder sitting beside your plate right now? Everything. Because the reason pepper is so cheap and so completely ignored today is that the centuries-long fight to control it eventually succeeded. Once Europeans broke the old monopolies and flooded the world with spice, the price collapsed. The thing that emperors hoarded and armies demanded as ransom slowly became so abundant that it lost its mystery entirely. The king of spices was dethroned, not by being forgotten, but by becoming ordinary. And that is the strange fate of pepper. It did not vanish. It won so completely that it became invisible. The next time you twist that grinder over your dinner, pause for just a second. You are holding a fruit from a vine on a rainy Indian coast. You are holding something that rode the monsoon winds to ancient Rome, that was packed into a pharaoh's tomb, that ransomed a city, that paid the rent of medieval lords, and that lured the ships of Europe across the oceans and into an age of conquest. You are holding a few specks of what was once worth more than gold. Right now, on a table somewhere near you, there is a little shaker of black pepper. So ordinary, you don't even see it anymore. But now you know. It was never ordinary. The whole world was once turned upside down for it.